Hello, thank you so much for taking some time out of your lunch to join us in this webinar. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I don't want to take too much of it. I also want to make sure you've got some time for lunch, and so I think we're going to be about 30 minutes. But what I want to talk about is return on investment and how to report on it. So when we're working with clients and we're working with the brand teams, we're developing these ideas and these strategies. Hopefully you're basing them off of benchmarks, but either way, you're coming up with a plan and you're executing that plan. And there comes a time at the end of the program where you've got to recap everything. And as a part of your recap, you've got your photos, you've got your reports back on the number of engagements and samples and those kinds of things. But what really matters is, or what isn't as important as those things, is your measures of return on investment. And you want to be able to do that in a way that is extremely transparent, is very defendable, is based on industry standards. So it doesn't look at any point like you are cooking the books, or that the fox is watching the hen house kind of situation. So I want to share with you some slides that you can use and even take those templates if you'd like to do that, so you can see how we do it and how we've done it for hundreds of brands and never had any pushback. So that's what we want to share with you today. In order to do that right, I think we got to start by talking about the ROI model itself. Now, for those of you that have been with us before, you're going to see something that you've seen before. And so it'll be a little bit of a review, but I promise this part won't be more than 10 minutes or so. But I want to make sure we're level set on what we're talking about when we're talking about return on investment. And so I'll start that by saying that everything we're doing when it comes to measuring experiential, it's got to be rooted in something so we know where we're going. And there are certain questions that are standard in marketing. And therefore, I suggest that your clients, the people that you're reporting to, your stakeholders, are used to thinking about marketing in this context. And so you want to give them information in your reports that align with the way they're used to thinking about marketing. And we do that by grounding it in 3 key questions. And that first question has to do with consumer reach, and it's about how often did we reach the right type of consumer. And it's just like any other media buy, whether you're looking at different channels, looking at different radio stations, TV stations, magazines, websites, you're doing that based on a perception of the kind of people you'll reach by going to those channels. And in experiential, we're doing the same thing with our venue selection. And so therefore, we want to be able to report back on the quality of that venue selection, not only from a volume of engagement, but from how often it was reaching the right type of audience. There's also a critical component that has to do with impact. And when we look at the tools to measure and evaluate any other marketing channel, there are clear measures of conversion, of click-through rates, of impact. And we got to be able to do the same thing with experiential. We frame that question as under when is the campaign creating intent where it didn't previously exist? And we say it that way because sometimes you're talking about purchase intent, but other times you're talking about consideration, or you're even trying to educate them enough about the brand solution that they're going to think about it the next time they're trying to solve that problem. And so this second area is about sales. It's about changing behavior or changing attitudes. And it's the way in which we change the people around their brand perception and when we're getting to those right kind of people from the first question. And that third key question is about value, and that's what we're going to talk about more today, is this idea of ROI. Now, ROI in and of itself, I'm going to show you how we get there, but the most important thing is that once you are there, you've got to segment it in order to get value from it. Because when you can segment it, you can look at those scenarios that are more valuable than others, that are delivering a better return than others, and that becomes the same A/B split testing that you would be doing for any other marketing. And we can do that for experiential at this macro, longer time horizon, and that's the way to think about ROI so that it can be actionable. Just like A/B split testing is actionable for any other kind of marketing that you might be doing. So that said, let me walk you through how we develop that ROI. It's important to start by understanding that reach and impact come together to form that ROI, and therefore our data collection is focused on that reach and impact and the metrics involved in that. And so let's look at a typical activation day and suggest that we're at an event and we had maybe 90 engagements at that event. And this is related to that question of how often did we reach the right consumer. And when it comes to that 90 engagement count, which you're pretty used to counting and probably reporting on, that's the how often component. That's the quantity aspect of what we're trying to measure. But It can involve number of people. It can involve number of things done on site. It probably relates to the number of event days. But what becomes even more important is how often it's the right type of consumer, how often we're reaching the audience that we expected to reach when we selected that venue in the first place. And when we do that and compare it to our engagement count, we're then able to start to get a sense of what our volume is of on-target consumer reach. It could be gender, it could be defined by age, it could be defined by parental status. Oftentimes it might be a lifestyle match or your position within the industry. Either way, you want to get to that measure because you want to understand who are going to be internalizing the sales proposition that you are creating as a part of the communication with the market. And in our situation here, if we had 90 engagements and 90% were on target, we would have 81 people that from this day of activity that represented the kind of people we were trying to reach. Now let's take it one step further and see how we then look to see how we impacted these folks. We got to start by looking at only incremental impact, or those people that didn't previously have a predetermined purchase intention. We need to do that because we want to look at ROI as new revenue, not a repeat of revenue that would have happened otherwise. And so we have to have a simple way to identify where this impact didn't previously exist. And we can do that based on their brand history, based on their previous relationship to the brand. And it's a little ultra conservative to do it this way, but we can look at the brand cycle of need, awareness, trial, and purchase, and we can simply remove those that don't currently buy the brand. And when we have those that have never heard of the brand before today, we have those that are aware but have never purchased, or we have those that have purchased before but not within the most recent purchase cycle, then we're looking at non-customers. And so anything that we can do to understand the future purchase behavior of these non-customers, we can claim as incremental revenue. Now, there is an argument in many product categories that are a part of experiential that you could be promoting incremental usage. You could be talking about usage occasions that are new for the consumer target. And therefore, you're not only promoting the sale of that product to those that haven't bought, but you're looking to increase the volume of purchase by those that have bought. We're going to leave that value on the table because we want to lean towards something that's simple and conservative. So we're not going to include that. There are customized ways of doing it when it's really critical to your campaign, but for our purposes here, we're going to ignore that particular component. So when we have that non-customer percentage, we can now apply that to the 81 people, and we start to realize that where it didn't previously exist, there are about 66 people, 66 that are on target and non-customers. And now with that 66, we got to figure out, well, did we create intent? Did we move them through the purchase cycle? Well, early stage consumers are going to be changing their attitude. Later stage consumers are going to be changing their behavior. And that's the way we can look to see how we've moved them through that process. And when we get that, we can start to look at those changes in behavior across the board where we really expect it for latter stage consumers. And we can use that as an intent measure based on their future purchase intention as they express it in an on-site survey or different ways of getting that feedback. I'll talk more about that in a second. And so in this case, if 98% of those non-customers said they were going to buy in the future, that gives us 51 people that left the event with at least a verbalized intent to buy who probably wouldn't have bought otherwise. Now, there's a big issue with that measure, and that issue is, frankly, that people don't always do what they say they're going to do. And so we need to find a way to adjust for that overstating. And we can do that using some fairly standard industry models. We're a fan of basis modeling. There's different ways of doing that. But basically what you're doing is looking at the rate at which they answered an intent question, comparing that to actual behavior records from millions of studies across industry, and using that to derive a percent that you can confidently say do what they actually said they were going to do. And when you have that percent, you can then apply it to those 51 people and start to get a sense of these 51, how many do I think will actually buy? How can I get a reasonable conservative estimate of those that are actually going to purchase? And in this case, if we apply that 44% as an example to the 51 potential buyers, we're left with a measure of 23 people that are our estimated new customers. These are people that are leaving the event with an expressed intent to purchase that wouldn't have bought otherwise. And we filter that down significantly to derive it to an actual purchase measure. Okay, that's a lot. If you're still following me, those 23 people are very valuable because we can, at a surface level, divide it by 90 engagements and get a conversion measure. And so now we're already looking at the same kind of metrics that you would get through other channels. But more importantly, that starts to give us an inroad into a dollar amount because those 23 people, they have an actual value to the brand. We know that every consumer has a lifetime value or an annualized value. And in this case, if that was $51, $50.97 hypothetically, we can multiply that by the 23 and we can see that this day of activity, we can estimate fairly that it generated upwards of 1,100 in value, 1,100 in revenue. We can divide that by activation costs and we can get a return on investment. And now this is just for one day of activity, but we can apply that to all of the activities. If we're collecting this information at a little bit at every activation, then we're going to get to a place where it scales across the whole program. And we can now see that we had that 2,300 customer engagements across maybe 100 event days. And at that same valuation, be it annual or lifetime, there's different ways of doing that, we're looking at about 117,000 in value. We divide that by 70,000 in costs, and we're seeing this 168% full program return on investment. Now that's interesting, and that gets us to that holy grail, but it's useless because it's a standalone number that hasn't been segmented. In order to do that A/B split testing I talked about, we have to be able to segment it. And we can segment that because we collected this data across all those 100 event days. And so we can start to look at all the different decisions we made that went into what resulted in that overall macro 168, 169% ROI. And we can start to segment it by, let's say, the different types of venues that we were at. So if we were at festivals versus retail versus a community event, we're going to see a wide variety of ROI based on those different scenarios. And what's beautiful about this model and what makes this model so incredibly actionable is that when we look at this hypothetical example, we see festivals so much outperformed community events. I can go back into my data and I can look to see, was it the number of people I reached? Was it the kind of people I reached? Was it the impact I had on them? Or was it what I spent to do all of that? And when I deconstruct that by festival versus community event, I can get a very clear picture of where I'm bleeding and where is my ROI being maximized and why, and where is it minimum and why. And with that, I can make very strategic decisions about whether I should do less community events and put that money into festivals, or should I do my community events differently to give them a better chance at producing a stronger ROI? And that at its heart is the nature of A/B split testing. It's looking at the average, splitting it by the things I have control over, doing more of the things that are working well and less of the things that are not. And so you might look at venue type, which is one of the most powerful segments when we're looking to act on these results. But also the markets you go to are going to have a lot of variation. The kind of people you reach are going to have a lot of variation. And all of that together is going to be delivering you a variation in your ROI that you can deconstruct and better understand. Okay, so that's the 15 minutes that I told you we were going to look at the background for ROI. And now that we have that, I think the key question is, how do we use that information? How do we report on that information in a way that's going to be meaningful to a stakeholder or a brand team? And how do we provide that to them in a report format? Like how do we bring all that together into some comprehensive reporting? And so what I want to do is I want to show you the way we do it. I want to show you some very generic slides because they're a template that we're happy to send you if you'd like. And that template has proven to be pretty valuable. We do anywhere from 50 to 70 campaign measurements. We work on 50 to 70 brands a year. We've been using this format pretty consistently for this is our 17th year, and it continuously resonates with agency directors, with brand professionals. It really gives them what they need to understand ROI and to understand how they can manage it. So let me share with you those slides, walk through those in about 10 minutes, and then tell you where you can get more of this information. So the first thing you want to make sure you're doing is you're just kind of introducing the idea overall. And so you're saying, now this is the return on investment model. You're communicating that value in the return on investment comes from two different places. It comes from the incremental revenue from additional purchases, which is what I just described in a macro level. It also comes from the value of the impressions that you generated. And how you value impressions is something that I'll also show, and how you communicate that. I'll show that in this page. You're bringing the value of incremental revenue, you're adding that to the value of the impressions, and that becomes your total value generated. You're dividing that by your costs, and that's how you're getting ROI. So this first slide is just introducing the basic concept of the model. Once you have that, now you can start to go through the tool I just communicated to you, and start to look at, or the model I just communicated, and look how it falls out. And so in this approach, we're starting with the total number of engagements. And in many cases, you might want to reduce that total number by a certain percentage, because we want to be conservative in our estimates, and we want the client and the stakeholders to look at our resulting ROI and to always say to us, I understand it, and if anything, you've made too many assumptions, it's too low. And we do that in different areas, using levers to help us control for any indication that we're exaggerating, because that's where your trust comes in, and you want to make sure that you're on the right side of that. And so one way we do that is we lop off 10% off of the total engagement count right in the beginning, under the assumption that there's always that 1 in 10 consumer that was just looking at their shoes. They weren't engaging. They were present. They were doing the things they were supposed to do that got them counted as an interaction. But they might be grabbing that sample and just throwing it in the trash can 2 seconds later. So we want to account for that at some level. At a minimum, we'd say 10%. You know the nature of your activations, and if you want to make that higher or lower. But that's the first place that we can start to trim a little bit to make sure these models are viewed as conservative. Now, the second place the second thing we do in this model is we apply whether they were learning about the brand for the first time, whether they were aware non-customers, whether they were win-backs, past customers, or whether they're current customers. And this is where they are in that purchase cycle, and we have the percentages that we'll know from each of those 4 areas of what their category is. And what we find is that future purchase intention varies greatly by these 4 measures. And really what tends to happen across most industries is that as somebody has more historical experience with the brand, when they're engaged at experiential and they are given the opportunity to have those value propositions reinforced with them, they're progressively showing a higher future purchase intent. And so that win-back certainly show higher than the aware non-customers or the newly educated. And current customers tend to be the most loyal, so they tend to have the highest percent of future buy. That's self-selected. That's the reason why they're current customers to begin with. So we can take all of their purchase intentions and we can look to see how that varies by each of these groups. And then we can do that math all the way through. We can look at the number of engagements after 10% is taken out. We can say the percent of those that were newly educated, the percent that plan to purchase in the future, and we multiply those 3 numbers, we're left with a likely new buyer count. And I can do that through all 3 of these categories to get the likely new buyers from each of those categories. Now you'll notice that I'm not doing that for current customers, and that's the part where we're excluding those that we don't know for a fact wouldn't have bought anyways. But with these 3 numbers here, I can add those up and I can run it through my adjustment figure. If you remember back on our review of the methodology or the model, we had that adjustment figure of 44%. Here, it could be whatever it is. It's going to be different based on the way in which the product category you're in and the way that that information is being provided. But we get that adjustment figure, and coming out of that, let's see if I can move this. I can't. But coming out of that, what you'll see here is the total count of likely new buyers. And with those likely new buyer count, in our example before it was 23, you can then multiply by the lifetime customer value, the annualized customer value. Some people look at gross revenue, some people look at net profits. There's all kinds of ways of thinking about it. But with that, you can get a total projected revenue count. And walking through this for an actual campaign with the client team and then having your explanations on the right-hand side, it tends to ring true. It tends to come home with folks where they understand how you're getting to this projected revenue figure. Now, once you have that, you want to look at the add value equivalency of the impressions you generated. And that's how we put value, a dollar value to your impressions, is we look to see what's called an AVE, or, if I was to buy these impressions through another source, what would it have cost me to purchase that? And it's the same logic that we use when we're valuing a home, for example, with real estate sales. What's the value of a house? Well, the value of a house is what the market would pay for it. And that same logic and industry standard can apply to the way you value your impressions. If I generated a certain number of impressions at my activations, the value of that is what it would have cost the brand to have bought those as a standalone effort. And so we can do that. Here, there are 5 different areas in which impressions tend to be generated from experiential, and each of those have a different approach that's based on industry standard data and some academic research. All the background of this stuff, I know I'm going really quick through it, but you can reach out to us and we'd be happy to jump on a call and talk to you through any of these points. You've got your mobile impressions, so it's going to be your miles driven in a wrapped vehicle multiplied by, we tend to use a standard metric of 101, 101 impressions per all-purpose vehicle mile. Some arguments say it could be upwards over 200. There are legitimate white papers and publications based on real research that talk about each of those measures, and so with some consultation you can choose one or the other. But we tend to lean towards the more conservative for the reasons I spoke about earlier. So you have your mobile impressions, that you get that count. You have your on-site event impressions, and that's really the number of attendants based on a multiplier related to where your event or signage is in the context of that. So if you are at very low rates, the cheapest possible footprint location, you're going to have a much lower awareness than if you are at a premium title sponsor type position. And there's ways of operationalizing that in a normalized way that we can certainly share with you if that's something you're working on. Word of mouth behavior is really that advocacy measure or that viral component to what you're doing. It's driven by the positive brand experience. It's driven by the premiums that you're distributing. There are all kinds of methods of doing that allow us to get to a total number of impressions based on that viral component or word of mouth. And then you have the media that you earned because of what you did was so awesome and splashy that you got attention from media and PR. And then you have the media that you purchased outright. So that could be your social components, or that could be ads that you bought through other channels. But it's the media you bought and then the media you earned. It's the advocacy or word of mouth. It's the event impressions, and it's the mobile impressions. Bring all that together, you get a total impression count. You then multiply it by what would be a CPM. So media is purchased in a cost per thousand. It varies by brand based on the channels they focus on and who they're trying to target. You might look at like floor graphics in Walmart and you're paying up over $22 per thousand. You might look at a freestanding insert in a newspaper and you're probably talking about $4 or $5 per thousand. And so there's that range. Print media is going to be different than digital impressions. And so everything being equal as a starting point, we use a $12 per thousand valuation. It gives us about 1.2 cents per impression. But again, this is an area where you would customize based on who you're working with and how they buy media. And also I always encourage you to err on the side of being a little bit conservative, too conservative. And when you multiply that 1.2 cents per impression towards the total impressions, you get a value for impressions, right? And now with that, we can take those measures and bring them together. We can look at the incremental revenue. We can look at the ad value equivalency. We can get a total value. We can divide that by our total cost to get our ROI. And we can lay that out very nicely for the client to see here. And now, if you're subscribed to Portmaw's benchmarks, or if you have benchmarks from previous year or other work that you've done, then you can certainly, this would be the place to put that in here and to say, you know, this is where we stack up against the industry or the consumer category or the venue type, however you want to think about what you want to benchmark against. So you have that context. You can say, hey, we're at 168, and on average, this kind of activation delivers around 130, 140%. So we're teetering on best practices and what we're doing. But really what matters the most is when you're segmenting. When you're segmenting that ROI by the different scenarios that you developed. So if you were talking to men versus women, or different age groups, or if you were talking to that target consumer versus not, maybe there's different venue types you were at or the market you were at. and you run that ROI, like I said before, we call it a sensitivity analysis, but you run that across all these different scenarios, and what starts to emerge is a very clear picture of where that value is coming from. And in your write-up and in your interpretation or your analyst notes, you are communicating why. You're communicating if it was the volume of people, the type of people, the impact generated, or the cost to do so. And in doing so, you're creating a strategic roadmap for how the client's going to activate in the future. So that is the ROI models. Now, there are other pages to a good deck that's going to talk about this. This is a reflection from Keller Fay on how the word of mouth behavior differs by industry. And there's research that you can cite to understand what that multiplier is for the advocates you're generating on site. There's also the background for the basis modeling you're using to get that adjustment figure. And we encourage you to have that as a part of your ROI reporting. And there's also the way in which you calculated your lifetime value. And if you've been a part of some of our earlier webinars, there are techniques to calculate or estimate the annualized value per customer. Your brand teams tend to have it, your brand managers tend to have it, but if they don't feel comfortable sharing it, or if they don't know what it is, it gives you a place to start with what that number should be so that you can do the modeling and share that with them. So these are the things that we wanted to share up front. We wanted to make sure you had access to these pages. And what you can do to get that access, I can show you real quick, is if you jumped over to, if you jumped over to this page on our website, you can get there by going to, sorry about that. You can look at portmod.net/ROI-recap. And I believe you might see that in the chat right now if you're looking for it. So it's portmod.net/ROI-recap. And when you do that, you're going to be brought to this page here. You can give us your email address right here. That's going to bounce you over to the download page. And when you click on download, we've got a nice one-page summary that you'll get access to that gives you all the information that we just talked about, and it gives you those slides that I just described, so you can see, have a record of them and replicate them to the degree to which it makes sense for you to do so. If you would like more information about any of the stuff that we talked about here, then I'm going to go ahead and encourage you to jump into our on our website. When you do submit and download that, down here there's a great scheduling tool where you can reach out to us directly at a time that's convenient for you, and we would not only be happy to answer any questions you might have, we can also share with you this deck and give you the actual PowerPoint slides, so you can, if that's easier for you. So that's what we wanted to share today. We're coming right up on 30 minutes, so timing is working out just right. Please go enjoy the rest of your lunch. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time, and I wish you a great day. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.